Something is starting to take shape inside the Pittsburgh Steelers organization, and when you really listen closely to the conversations happening around this team, especially when it comes directly from informed voices answering fan questions, you begin to understand the direction this franchise might be heading into the 2026 season, and it all seems to revolve around one very important theme: controlled transition at the quarterback position while trying to stay competitive right now. Let's get straight into it, because one of the biggest talking points right now is the ongoing discussion about Aaron Rodgers and what his presence actually means for this team. There's a clear sense that what he already accomplished, delivering an AFC North championship and coming through in clutch moments, including that memorable drive against the Ravens, has cemented a unique legacy. Not necessarily as the greatest Steelers quarterback of all time, but as a figure tied to a specific meaningful chapter. That matters more than people think, especially in a franchise built on history. But at the same time, the Steelers are not blind to reality. Rodgers is not a long-term solution, and that's where the real strategy begins to unfold. There's a growing belief that Pittsburgh is trying to quietly build the next phase at quarterback without forcing it too early. Will Howard is a central piece in that conversation. The evaluation of him is honest and measured. He has tools, he has potential, but there are clear limitations. He's not viewed as a generational talent or someone who can take over games off script. Instead, the expectation is that if he reaches his ceiling, it will be through development into a precise, efficient passer. That's not a small task, and it tells you everything about how patient this process needs to be. And here's where it gets even more interesting. The idea of bringing in another young quarterback, someone like Drew Aller, has been heavily discussed, but not as an immediate solution. In fact, there are real concerns about whether Aller would even be ready to compete right away. His mechanics, especially footwork, and inconsistencies on tape suggest he needs time. Real time. Development time. So now you start to see the bigger picture. If Rodgers stays, the Steelers could be setting up a multi-year development pipeline. Imagine this scenario: Rodgers as the veteran leader, Mike McCarthy working closely with young quarterbacks, and multiple prospects like Howard, and potentially another rookie learning in the background. That's not just depth, that's a deliberate attempt to create internal competition for the future. And competition is exactly what this team seems to want, not just at quarterback, but across the roster. Take the wide receiver discussion, for example. There's a strong indication that Pittsburgh is seriously considering using a first-round pick on the position. The logic is clear. Pairing another high-level receiver with DK Metcalf and Michael Pittman Jr. could completely transform the offense. Not just for Rodgers in the short term, but for whoever takes over long term. It's about building an environment where a young quarterback can succeed when his time comes. At the same time, there are still concerns, especially along the offensive line. Left guard remains a key position that could shift the entire draft strategy. If that spot isn't addressed properly in free agency, it could take priority over everything else. And that uncertainty is important because it shows that while the Steelers have a vision, they are still balancing immediate needs with long-term planning. Another layer to this is the current quarterback room structure. As things stand, the most likely scenario appears to be Rodgers as QB1, Mason Rudolph as a trusted backup, and Will Howard continuing to develop. There's even the possibility of adding another young quarterback into that mix, but one thing is clear: the organization values stability behind Rodgers. Rudolph is seen as reliable, and there's hesitation to move on from him, especially given his relationship with Rodgers himself. So now you're looking at a team that isn't rushing into a rebuild, but also isn't ignoring the future. They're threading a very fine needle, trying to win now while quietly preparing for what comes next. And maybe the most telling part of all of this is how they're approaching risk. There's no desperation move here, no all-in gamble on an unproven quarterback. Instead, it's layered planning, multiple options, and internal competition. That's how sustainable teams operate. But the big question remains, and it's one that could define the direction of this franchise over the next 2 years. If the Steelers do move forward with this approach, keeping Rodgers, developing Howard, possibly adding another young quarterback, do you believe this strategy is enough to secure the next true franchise quarterback in Pittsburgh, or are they risking falling into long-term uncertainty at the most important position in football? And that's exactly where the pressure starts to build, because once you commit to this kind of layered quarterback strategy, you are no longer just developing players. You are managing timelines, expectations, and eventually difficult decisions that can shape the entire mustaqbal of the franchise. Think about what this could look like heading into 2027. If Aaron Rodgers does return and plays out what many expect to be his final stretch, the Steelers Steelers could realistically enter that offseason with multiple young quarterbacks who have spent significant time inside the system. Will Howard would have had not just one, but potentially 2 full seasons learning behind a veteran, adjusting to NFL speed, and working under a coaching staff known for developing quarterbacks. If another prospect like Drew Aller, or any rookie brought into the system, follows that same path, you suddenly have a real internal competition brewing, and this is where things get fascinating, because instead of forcing a decision too early, Pittsburgh could let that competition play out naturally. Training camp becomes more than just preparation. It becomes a proving ground for the future of the franchise. And in that scenario, the Steelers aren't guessing anymore. They're choosing from within, based on development, consistency, and performance over time. But there's a flip side to this approach that cannot be ignored. If none of these quarterbacks truly separates themselves, if Howard remains limited, or the rookie never fully develops, then the Steelers could find themselves stuck in one of the worst positions in the NFL. Good enough to compete, but without the elite quarterback needed to truly contend for a Super Bowl. And that's the risk of patience. It can either build something sustainable, or delay the inevitable need to make a bold move. Now, let's connect that back to the rest of the roster, because this plan only works if the team around these quarterbacks is strong enough to support them. That's why the emphasis on wide receiver makes so much sense. Adding another top-tier talent to a group that already includes DK Metcalf and Michael Pittman Jr. isn't just about weapons. It's about creating a quarterback-friendly environment. It's about ensuring that when a young passer does take over, he's stepping into a situation designed for success, not survival. And the same logic applies to the offensive line. The concerns at left guard are not minor. They are central to everything, because no matter how talented your quarterback is, development becomes nearly impossible if protection breaks down. That's why the decisions made in free agency and the draft over the next few months are going to be critical. They're not just filling gaps, they're building the foundation for this entire transition plan. Even the depth conversations matter here, whether it's adding a veteran receiver who understands the system, reinforcing the tight end room, or bringing in competition at tackle. Every move contributes to the bigger picture. This isn't about one position, it's about creating a complete roster that can support both a veteran leader now and a young quarterback later. And then there's the Mason Rudolph factor, which quietly adds another layer to all of this. Keeping him as a steady QB2 isn't just about depth, it's about stability in the room. He represents a known quantity, someone the coaching staff trusts, and someone who can step in without completely derailing the system if needed. But at the same time, his presence also limits opportunities for younger players to see the field. So eventually, even that decision may need to be revisited depending on how the younger quarterbacks develop. When you step back and look at everything together, it becomes clear that the Steelers are not just building a roster, they are building a timeline. Every move, every evaluation, every decision ties back to when and how they transition away from Rodgers and into the next era. And the truth is, this kind of strategy requires confidence. Confidence in your coaching staff, in your scouting, and most importantly, in your ability to develop talent internally. Because if you get it right, you create continuity and long-term stability at the most important position in sports. But if you get it wrong, you risk wasting a talented roster searching for answers that never fully come. So now it comes down to you. As a Steelers fan watching this all unfold, do you trust this patient developmental approach at quarterback? Or do you think the team should be more aggressive in finding their next franchise leader right now? And the more you sit with this, the more you realize that everything the Steelers are doing right now is quietly setting up one defining moment, the moment where they have to choose who leads this franchise into the next era after Aaron Rodgers. Because eventually all the development, all the patience, all the planning, it has to turn into a decision. And what makes this situation even more intriguing is that Pittsburgh might be preparing for multiple outcomes at the same time. If Will Howard takes a real step forward, improves his processing, becomes that efficient, controlled passer they believe he can be, then you have a homegrown option who understands the system and has earned the locker room over time. That's the ideal scenario for a team that values continuity. But if that doesn't happen, if his growth stalls or never quite reaches that level, then the presence of another young quarterback, whether it's someone like Drew Aller or another draft pick, suddenly becomes critical. And not just as a backup plan, but as a legitimate alternative. That's why bringing in multiple young quarterbacks isn't redundancy, it's insurance. And this is something great organizations do well. They don't bet everything on one outcome. They create competition, they create options, and they let performance decide. Now here's where things start to get even more strategic. If the Steelers do hit on a wide receiver in the first round, especially someone with the kind of complete skill set that's been talked about, a player who can run routes at every level, create yards after the catch, win contested situations, then you're not just adding talent. You're building a structure where a young quarterback doesn't have to be perfect to succeed. Pair that with DK Metcalf stretching the field and Michael Pittman Jr. bringing physicality and consistency, and suddenly you have one of the most quarterback-friendly receiver groups in the league. That changes everything for whoever steps under center next, and that's the part fans should really be paying attention to. Because while all the focus is on the quarterback battle, the Steelers might actually be building the kind of roster that can elevate a quarterback, rather than relying on one to carry the team. But again, none of this works if the foundation isn't solid. The offensive line, especially that left guard position, remains the one area that could disrupt this entire plan if it's not handled correctly. You can develop quarterbacks, you can stack weapons, but if protection breaks down consistently, it limits everything. It affects timing, confidence, and ultimately development. So when you hear that this is still an unresolved issue, that should stand out just as much as any quarterback conversation. And then there's the draft capital, 12 picks. That's not just an opportunity, that's flexibility. That's the ability to address multiple needs, take calculated risks, and potentially find hidden value at key positions. This is where front office leadership, especially from Omar Khan, becomes crucial, because the margin for error here is smaller than it looks. You don't need all 12 picks to hit, but you need the right ones to hit. And based on everything we're seeing, the approach so far has been solid, but not complete. There's a sense that the biggest moves might still be ahead, that the foundation is being laid now, but the defining pieces are still coming. So when you look at this entire situation from top to bottom, it's not just about Rodgers, it's not just about Howard or any potential rookie, it's about whether the Steelers can successfully transition from one era to the next without falling into that gap that so many teams struggle with after losing a veteran quarterback, because that gap is real, and once you fall into it, it's hard to climb out. That's why this moment matters so much. Everything being done right now, the patience, the roster building, the competition, it's all leading toward one goal, making sure that when the time comes, the Steelers are ready, not scrambling. So now it really comes down to execution. If they develop the right quarterback, if they continue to build around him, and if they make the right calls when the pressure is highest, this could be one of the smoothest transitions we've seen from a veteran quarterback era into a new one. But if even one of those pieces falls short, the entire plan could start to unravel. And when you really zoom out, this is no longer just a conversation about players or positions. This is about identity. Because for years, the Pittsburgh Steelers have been defined by stability at quarterback. From one era to the next, there was always a clear answer, always a leader that the entire organization and fan base could rally behind. That kind of continuity is rare in the NFL, and once it's gone, you don't just replace it overnight. That's exactly why this current phase feels so different. For the first time in a long time, the Steelers are not operating with a guaranteed long-term answer under center. Instead, they're building a system designed